This is a story I haven't told before, but it seemed like a good time to tell it. My Nana owned a honky-tonk bar on Sand Mountain in Alabama. And when I was a kid in the summers, I wouldn't drive, my mother would drive me down and drop me off there, and I would spend the whole summer hanging out with my family. And most of the time I spent sitting next to the jukebox, plugging quarters in and playing songs. And as you can imagine, it was pretty lonely. There weren't a lot of other children hanging out in the bar. And I was the only grandchild until my uncle got married to a woman who had a son, Michael. And Michael and I were fast friends, and when I would go to Alabama and he was there, we would hang out and we would do stuff all kids do in Alabama. We would catch fireflies and build forts in the woods and go fishing. And when we got to high school, we would drive around and listen to music. And of course, it was country music because it was south of the Mason-Dixon line, and that's all that was on the radio at the time. And we both loved country music, and we both particularly loved outlaw country. Now, outlaw country is mostly what we all still listen to now, so it's Johnny Cash and Merle Haggard, Willie Nelson, kind of the hippies of country music back in the 70s and 80s, and David Allan Coe. Interesting. I didn't know you all would know David Allan Coe. That was Michael's favorite. And the thing about David Allan Coe is that he would choose songs to sing and he would write songs to sing that could take you to a place. And that's a real gift of a songwriter, to deliver you to another location. And you're in there. If he's singing about a trailer, you're in the trailer with him. Incredible, incredible. And Michael's favorite David Allan Coe song was The Ride, and it became my favorite song. It's just got everything you want a song to have. Or a country song to have. It's got Alabama, it's got Tennessee, it's got a hitchhiker with a guitar on his back just trying to make it to Nashville. The ghost of Hank Williams comes, gives him advice. It has everything. Let me think if I can remember the words. I was thumbing from Montgomery. I had a guitar on my back when a stranger stopped beside me in an antique Cadillac. See, he was dressed like 1950, half drunk and hollow-eyed. He said, "It's a long walk to Nashville. Would you like a ride?" Yes, I would like a ride. Yes, I would like a ride to Nashville, ghost of Hank Williams. But I went to college instead. Michael went to work in a chicken factory. After my freshman year, some friends and I were taking a road trip to Florida, and I talked him into taking a pit stop in Alabama to visit with Michael. And I called him, and he said, "Sure, come on over. There's a party. You guys can come with me." So we took the 100-mile detour off the interstate over to No Man's Land, Alabama, met up with Michael. You know, and he's my cousin. And my friends saw him, and they were like, "Oh, my God, he's so good looking." He's tall and tan and polite and kind, and he had that, like, Southern charm, charisma. I personally couldn't take my eyes off his long sheet of blonde hair that came past his shoulders that was really short on the sides and really spiky on the top. It was 1995. I'm fairly certain that this particular haircut was out of fashion everywhere else in the country. But like can happen in the South, the tradition was hung on to. So we get in the Bronco. Right away, David Allan Coe is playing on the radio. "My long hair just can't cover up my redneck." That's a real song. Followed by The Ride. We're singing along, and Michael passes the Jack Daniels around, because of course we're driving around and drinking. It's called a booze cruise. Put our feet out the window, singing, having a good time, heading to the party. And I noticed in the rearview mirror there's about 10 cars behind us, trucks kind of lining up. And you know, I'd been to barn parties before. I know we're probably caravanning out, and we're listening to the music, and Michael hands me a black duffel bag, and he says, "Hey, Nikki, get in there and put that flag out the window." And I look in there, and it's a Confederate flag. Now, Michael and I have known each other a long time at this point, and I know that he refers to Robert E. Lee as Uncle Lee. He talks about if the South would have won. He talks about Southern pride and states' rights and ancestors. And I read the biography of Malcolm X when I was 12 years old. All I'm talking about is racism. And we've had this fight for a long time. But there I am in the truck, and I don't know why. Maybe it's because I wanted to be polite. Maybe it's because it was the air I was swimming in. The Confederate flag was everywhere. But I hung it out the window. And I remember it vividly because there was so much adrenaline in my body. I was so uncomfortable. And as I hang the flag out the window, I see in the rearview mirror that the 15 cars behind us also have their flags out the window. And at the same time, I notice right up ahead there's some train tracks. And in that town, and in a lot of towns in the South, still, one side of the tracks is where the white people live, and on the other side of the tracks where the black people live, and we're getting ready to cross the tracks. And I can smell that people are grilling, and there's families outside in the yards, and I pull that flag in, and I ball up down in the seat, and I don't know, who knows what I was yelling, but I was yelling something at Michael, and I know that I asked to be taken back to my car, but that didn't happen. Caravan kept moving. And we went through town, and that was a moment I was very, very clear that this was not about Southern pride. This was about a threat. This was about aggression. This was about power. This is about racism. And we're riding out to the edge of town, and I see the woods, and we're driving into the woods. And I've been to a lot of barn parties. And most barns are in an open field, so like if there's an animal that could get into the barn, or if there are crops growing around, you could have your tractor that could come in and out of the barn. This particular barn was in the middle of the woods. It was terrifying. A barn shouldn't be in the woods. When we got there were probably, 45, 50 people already there. I say people, most of them were young men. There were less than 10 girls, me and my two friends among them. And we got out and we stood next to the car, and over to the left I see that there's some folks with shotguns on their shoulders and pistols. And in the distance there's some targets. And I can see that one of them has a Star of David. Another one has a pink triangle. And my friend must have seen it at the same time because she grabbed my wrist and she said, "You don't say nothing. You be quiet. We got to get out of here, and we're not going to make any difference here. Be quiet." And I was. And I will tell you, that was a long time ago, and there weren't cell phones, and you weren't recording, and you couldn't take pictures, but we've been watching the news a lot, and it wasn't that different than what we're seeing now, except that there were no journalists, and so people felt free to say what they really thought, which was terrifying. And I don't remember how I convinced Michael to take us back, but I did. And when we got into the car, he switched out the tape and put in another tape, and I was so scared and mad I wasn't even speaking, and I could hear that it was David Allan Coe playing on the stereo, but it was songs I didn't really recognize. And then I tuned in, and I could hear that it was racial slur after racial slur and homophobic, just awful. And it turns out that David Allan Coe had made these bootleg tapes that he self-produced, that he only sold at his live shows and in the back of Easy Rider magazine. Like I said, Michael loved David Allan Coe. He had every record he ever made. I didn't know that there was this backstory. There was this other music. And Michael and I, like I said, we'd had a lot of conversations about racism, and I was raised that there are no garbage people, and that people become who they are because of things that happen to them. You got to understand somebody's motivations. I also grew up with a lot of alcoholics in my family that people made excuses for. And so I had been making some excuses for Michael for a while, and in that moment, I just decided I was done. I was 18 years old that summer, and I never spoke to Michael again. But flash forward 18 years later, and I'm playing in a band, and I hear on the radio, I hear The Ride. And I can't tell you how much that song just took me home and reminded me not only of my people and my childhood, but my childhood dream was right in the middle of that song. And I picked up my guitar and I picked out the chords and I played it. Took it to the band. And they were like, oh, we love this song. We were playing it. And then after we got through rehearsing it, somebody said, hey, do you know about those bootleg tapes? And I said, yeah, I do. But most of the band didn't. And we went out to our show and we played it anyway. And I'm getting up there and I'm feeling it. Hair is standing on end because I'm singing this song about wanting to be a singer, wanting to be a star. And I'm in a packed house and got a great band. And I'm playing my song. And I look up and over to my right, my friend has come, and she's a black woman from the Carolinas, and we've talked many, many times about the Confederacy and the difference of racism in the South and racism in Portland. And I am filled with something else. Terror, shame, horror, fear that she knows that I know, fear that she feels unsafe, fear that I could have made a safe space and I chose not to. Because as a white person, I get to decide how much, how deeply, and how long something racist affects me. And it doesn't matter that I read Malcolm X when I was 12, that I got rid of Michael in my life when I was 18, that I went on to get a bachelor's degree in the history of the civil rights movement, that I was a 15-year social justice organizer and an out queer. None of that got rid of my racism. I wish it did. I'll be honest. I wish there was a fix. But I know that in my country is based on genocide and slavery. And even though our country is still a beacon of hope and opportunity around the world, it is still woven with racism, homophobia, misogyny. And of course, that's in me. But I do want to fix it once and for all. But as it turns out, I just have to keep fixing it again and again. And there's a lot to fix now. Keep fixing, keep paying attention to. And in so many ways, that song, The Ride, and David Allan Coe, and the people who wrote the song, have been great teachers to me. And just like any good country music song is supposed to do, it took me there, showed me some truth. Thanks.